Hey everyone. Today we dive into one of nature's most terrifying and mysterious disasters, the story of Lake Nyos and the night an entire valley fell silent. What really happened on August 21st, 1986, when a peaceful lake in Cameroon became a silent killer that claimed over 1,700 lives in a matter of minutes. The incredible story of Lake Nyos is one that defies belief, a tale where science fiction became horrifying reality in the remote highlands of West Africa. So before we dive in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now get comfortable, grab something to drink, and let's experience this incredible story together. Because what unfolded that August night in 1986 was so unprecedented, so utterly shocking, that it changed our understanding of how nature itself can turn deadly in ways we never imagined possible. Picture this. It's a quiet evening in the Cameroon highlands, nestled in the crater of an ancient volcano. Lake Nyos sits like a jewel in this remote landscape, its deep blue waters reflecting the stars above. The surrounding villages of Nyos, Cam, Che, and Subum are settling into their evening routines. Children are being tucked into bed, families are sharing their final meals of the day, and the gentle sounds of rural life echo across the valley. Joseph Ngwane, a local farmer, is preparing for sleep in his small home near the lake shore, completely unaware that he's about to become one of the few witnesses to survive an unprecedented natural disaster. The lake itself holds secrets that nobody in 1986 could have imagined. Deep beneath its serene surface, carbon dioxide has been silently accumulating for decades, maybe centuries. This isn't just any lake, you see. Lake Nyos sits directly above a pocket of magma, part of the Cameroon volcanic line, and ancient geological feature that stretches across the country. The magma far below continuously releases carbon dioxide, which dissolves into the lake's bottom waters under immense pressure. Layer by layer, year after year, the lake has been transformed into a massive liquid bomb, saturated with dissolved gas and waiting for the right trigger. But here's where things get really interesting, because what happened next defies everything we thought we knew about natural disasters. As the evening of August 21st progressed, something disturbed the delicate balance that had held this carbon dioxide in solution for so long. Scientists still debate exactly what triggered the event. Was it a landslide? A small earthquake? A sudden change in temperature? Or perhaps just the lake reaching its absolute saturation point? Whatever the cause, at approximately 9:30 p.m., Lake Nyos began to release its deadly secret. Joseph Ngwane later described hearing a rumbling sound, like distant thunder, coming from the direction of the lake. He stepped outside his home to investigate, and what he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. The lake was frothing and bubbling, and a strange white cloud was rising from its surface. This wasn't steam, this wasn't mist, this was something far more sinister. The cloud began to spread outward from the lake, moving with an unnatural heaviness, flowing like a river of death across the landscape. What Joseph was witnessing was a limnic eruption, one of the rarest and most deadly phenomena in nature. The carbon dioxide that had been dissolved in the lake's depths was suddenly released in a massive degassing event. Imagine opening a shaken bottle of soda, but instead of a small fizz, picture an explosion of gas so massive it could fill entire valleys. The carbon dioxide, being heavier than air, began to flow downhill like an invisible flood, displacing the oxygen that every living thing in the valley needed to survive. The deadly cloud moved with terrifying efficiency through the river valleys, following the natural contours of the landscape. It flowed through Nyos village first, then spread to Cam, Cha, and Subum. The gas cloud was moving at about 45 miles per hour, giving no one time to escape, no time to understand what was happening. People simply began to collapse where they stood, overcome by an invisible killer that left no trace, no warning, no opportunity for escape. Joseph Ngwane felt himself becoming weak and dizzy as the gas reached his location. He managed to stumble back into his house, but even there, the carbon dioxide was seeping in. He collapsed, lost consciousness, and remarkably, survived what should have been certain death. When he awakened hours later, the world around him had changed forever. The usual sounds of village life, the barking of dogs, the lowing of cattle, the voices of neighbors, all had been replaced by an eerie, absolute silence. Now, to understand the full horror of what happened next, we need to follow the path of destruction through each village. In Nyos, the closest settlement to the lake, the effects were almost instantaneous. Entire families were found the next morning exactly where they had been when the gas cloud struck. A mother was discovered still holding her baby, both having succumbed together. Children were found in their beds, appearing to be peacefully sleeping, but they would never wake again. The carbon dioxide had displaced all the oxygen in the air, causing people to lose consciousness and die from asphyxiation within minutes. The gas cloud continued its deadly journey through the valley systems. In Calm Village, about 6 miles from the lake, the story was repeated with horrifying consistency. People were found collapsed in their homes, in their yards, along the pathways where they had been walking. Some had managed to get a few steps before collapsing, but most simply dropped where they stood when the invisible death reached them. The carbon dioxide concentration was so high that it killed not just humans, but every living thing in its path. Cattle, goats, chickens, dogs, cats, even insects and birds, all succumbed to the same fate. But here's what makes this disaster even more chilling. The survivors. There were people who lived through this catastrophe, and their accounts provide a terrifying window into what it was like to experience a limnic eruption firsthand. Some survivors reported smelling a strange odor, like rotten eggs or gunpowder. Others described feeling suddenly weak and dizzy, as if the strength was being drained from their bodies. A few managed to reach higher ground where the gas concentration was lower, saving their lives by mere feet of elevation. One survivor, a young woman named Efrima Che, was visiting relatives in Subum when the disaster struck. She described waking up in the middle of the night, feeling like she couldn't breathe properly. The air felt thick and strange, and she could hear people coughing and gasping outside. She managed to climb onto her roof, where the air was slightly better, and stayed there until dawn. When she finally came down, she found that most of her relatives had perished during the night. She was one of only a handful of survivors in the entire village. The story takes an even stranger turn when we consider the scale of the environmental impact. This wasn't just a human tragedy, it was an ecological catastrophe of unprecedented proportions. The carbon dioxide cloud killed an estimated 3,500 livestock and countless wild animals. The gas was so concentrated that it killed insects, which meant that in the days following the disaster, the bodies of the victims showed no signs of decomposition. There were no flies, no bacteria, nothing alive to begin the natural process of decay. The entire ecosystem in the affected area had been temporarily sterilized by the massive release of carbon dioxide. When the sun rose on August 22, 1986, the true scope of the disaster began to reveal itself. The first rescue workers to arrive at the scene were met with a sight that defied comprehension. Entire villages lay silent and still, with bodies scattered everywhere but no signs of violence, no destruction, no obvious cause of death. It looked like some mysterious force had simply switched off the life in an entire valley. The rescue workers themselves had to be extremely careful, as pockets of carbon dioxide were still present in low-lying areas, creating ongoing danger for anyone attempting to help. The Cameroon government immediately launched a massive rescue and recovery operation, but what they found challenged every assumption about natural disasters. Dr. Haroun Tazieff, a famous French volcanologist, was among the first scientists to arrive at the scene. He later described the experience as the most disturbing disaster site he had ever encountered. The bodies showed no signs of trauma, no burns, no injuries. People had simply stopped breathing and died where they stood. It was as if an invisible hand had passed over the valley, taking life without leaving any other trace. What they discovered changed everything we thought we knew about the dangers lurking in seemingly peaceful lakes. The investigation revealed that Lake Nyos was essentially a giant carbonated lake, supersaturated with carbon dioxide from the volcanic activity beneath it. The gas had been building up for decades, possibly centuries, creating an increasingly unstable situation that nobody had recognized. The lake's deep, stratified waters had prevented the carbon dioxide from escaping naturally, allowing it to accumulate to deadly concentrations. The scientific team that investigated the disaster found that the lake had dropped by about 3 feet overnight, indicating the massive volume of water that had been displaced by the erupting gas. They estimated that approximately 1.6 million tons of carbon dioxide had been released in the span of just a few hours. To put this in perspective, that's equivalent to the amount of carbon dioxide that would be released by burning about 700,000 tons of coal, all released at once into a confined valley system. But here's where the story becomes even more fascinating and terrifying. Scientists realized that Lake Nyos wasn't unique. There were other lakes in the region with similar geological characteristics, and potentially around the world, that could be ticking time bombs waiting to release their own deadly gas clouds. Lake Monon, just 60 miles away, had experienced a similar but smaller event in 1984 that killed 37 people, though at the time, nobody understood what had caused it. The Lake Nyos disaster suddenly made that earlier event make sense, and it raised urgent questions about how many other lakes might pose similar threats. The international scientific community mobilized to understand this new type of natural disaster. They gave it a name, limnic eruption, also known as lake overturn. They discovered that only very specific conditions could create such deadly lakes. The lake needed to be deep enough to maintain pressure at the bottom. It needed to be in a volcanically active area to provide a source of carbon dioxide, and it needed to have stable water layers that prevented the gas from escaping naturally. These conditions exist in only a few places on Earth, but where they do exist, they create potential for catastrophic disasters. The story of the response to Lake Nyos reveals both the best and worst of human nature in the face of unprecedented tragedy. The immediate rescue efforts were hampered by the remote location of the villages and the ongoing danger from residual carbon dioxide. Helicopter pilots risked their lives to evacuate survivors and remove bodies, often having to use oxygen masks and limit their time on the ground. The few survivors were traumatized not just by their own near-death experience, but by the loss of entire communities, families, and ways of life. International aid poured in, but the response also highlighted the challenges of disaster relief in remote, developing regions. Many of the survivors were relocated to other areas, effectively ending centuries of traditional life in the affected valleys. The psychological impact on survivors was enormous. They had witnessed something that seemed to defy natural law, and many struggled with survivors' guilt and the traumatic memories of finding their entire communities dead. Now, to understand what happened next, we need to go back to the scientific investigation and the race to prevent future disasters. The researchers realized that Lake Nyos was still dangerous. The limnic eruption had released only a portion of the carbon dioxide dissolved in the lake's depths, and the gas was continuing to accumulate. Without intervention, another deadly eruption could occur at any time. The lake had become a loaded weapon pointing at any future communities that might develop in the area. The solution that scientists developed was both elegant and complex. They installed a degassing system in the lake, essentially a fountain that would continuously bring deep water to the surface, allowing the carbon dioxide to escape gradually and safely. The system consists of a pipe that extends down into the lake's depths, with the gas pressure itself powering a fountain that brings the carbonated water to the surface. It's like a permanent, controlled version of opening a soda bottle, preventing the dangerous buildup of gas while allowing the carbon dioxide to escape harmlessly into the atmosphere. The installation of this system was an engineering challenge of the highest order. Working on a lake that could potentially erupt again at any moment, engineers had to lower pipes hundreds of feet into the water and establish a system that could operate continuously without maintenance for years. The project was funded by international aid and represented a new type of disaster prevention technology, purpose-built to address a threat that had never been recognized before. But here's where things get really interesting about the long-term implications of the Lake Nyos disaster. The event fundamentally changed how we understand the relationship between geology and atmospheric hazards. It revealed that the Earth's surface could pose threats that were completely invisible and undetectable without sophisticated scientific knowledge. The disaster also highlighted the vulnerability of isolated communities to natural phenomena that exist outside of normal human experience. The scientific legacy of Lake Nyos extends far beyond the immediate tragedy. Researchers have since identified similar potentially dangerous lakes in other parts of the world, including Lake Kivu on the border between Rwanda and Democratic Republic of Congo, which contains not just carbon dioxide but also methane, making it potentially even more dangerous. The disaster led to the development of new monitoring technologies and early warning systems for limnic eruptions, though these systems are still in their infancy. The story also reveals the complex intersection of natural disaster, human development, and environmental science. The villages affected by the Lake Nyos disaster had existed in that location for generations, completely unaware that they were living next to what was essentially a natural weapon of mass destruction. The tragedy raises profound questions about how we assess and communicate environmental risks, especially in regions where scientific resources are limited. What they discovered changed everything about how we think about hidden dangers in our natural environment. The Lake Nyos disaster demonstrated that some of the most deadly threats posed by nature are also the most invisible and unexpected. Unlike earthquakes, hurricanes, or volcanic eruptions, limnic eruptions provide no warning, no opportunity for evacuation, and no chance for survival if you're caught in the affected area. The disaster revealed that our planet still holds secrets that can turn deadly with little or no warning. The human cost of the Lake Nyos disaster extended far beyond the immediate death toll. Entire cultural communities were wiped out, taking with them languages, traditions, and ways of life that had developed over centuries. The survivors were not just dealing with physical trauma, but with the complete destruction of their social and cultural world. Many of the affected villages had their own distinct dialects and customs that were lost forever when the communities were destroyed. The environmental impact of the disaster also had long-lasting consequences. The massive release of carbon dioxide temporarily altered the local ecosystem, and the absence of insects and other small creatures in the immediate aftermath created a bizarre, sterile landscape that took months to recover. The lake itself remained dangerous for years, with researchers monitoring gas levels and working to prevent another eruption. The international response to Lake Nyos also revealed the challenges of disaster relief in remote, developing regions. The affected area was so isolated that it took days for news of the disaster to reach the outside world, and even longer for effective aid to arrive. The lack of infrastructure made evacuation and medical care extremely difficult, and the cultural and linguistic barriers complicated efforts to help survivors understand what had happened and how to avoid future risks. The story of Lake Nyos continues to this day because the threat hasn't been completely eliminated. While the degassing system has successfully reduced the gas concentration in the lake, scientists continue to monitor the situation closely. The system requires maintenance and could potentially fail, and the underlying geological conditions that created the hazard in the first place remain unchanged. The lake serves as a permanent reminder of the hidden dangers that can lurk in seemingly peaceful, natural environments. The disaster also had profound implications for how we think about natural hazards and community preparedness. Traditional disaster preparedness focuses on events that provide some warning or opportunity for response. But limnic eruptions represent a category of natural disaster that is almost impossible to prepare for at the community level. The only effective protection is prevention through scientific monitoring and intervention, highlighting the critical importance of scientific research in protecting vulnerable communities. The legacy of Lake Nyos extends into modern discussions about climate change and environmental monitoring. As human development expands into previously uninhabited areas, the risk of encountering unknown natural hazards increases. The disaster serves as a powerful reminder that our planet still holds surprises that can be deadly, and that scientific understanding of natural systems is crucial for human safety. The story takes on additional significance when we consider that similar geological conditions exist in other parts of the world, including some areas with much larger populations. Lake Kivu, which sits on the border between Rwanda and Democratic Republic of Congo, contains both carbon dioxide and methane, and serves a population of more than 2 million people. The lessons learned from Lake Nyos have been applied to monitoring and potentially degassing this much larger lake, but the technical challenges are enormous. What really happened at Lake Nyos was a perfect storm of geological conditions, human settlement patterns, and scientific ignorance that created one of the most unique and terrifying natural disasters in recorded history. The event revealed that nature still holds the power to surprise us in the most deadly ways, and that our understanding of the risks posed by seemingly peaceful natural features remains incomplete. The disaster changed how we think about hidden environmental hazards and led to new technologies and monitoring systems designed to prevent similar tragedies. The silence that fell over the valley that August night in 1986 was not just the absence of sound, but the absence of life itself, removed by an invisible force that had been building for decades beneath the surface of a beautiful lake. The few survivors like Joseph and Quayne carry with them not just the memory of their own near-death experience, but the weight of being witnesses to one of nature's most unprecedented and devastating displays of hidden power. Their stories remind us that our planet still holds secrets that can turn deadly without warning, and that the peaceful appearance of natural features can sometimes hide the most dangerous threats of all. The psychological impact on the survivors cannot be overstated. Imagine waking up to find that everyone you've ever known, your entire community, your family, your neighbors, have all died in their sleep from an invisible killer that you somehow survived. The guilt, the trauma, the complete disruption of everything familiar in your life. Many survivors reported nightmares for years afterward, dreams where they could hear the rumbling sound from the lake, where they watched the white cloud approaching again and again. Some survivors developed what we would now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, though mental health resources in rural Cameroon in the 1980s were virtually non-existent. The cultural impact was equally devastating. The affected villages weren't just collections of houses, they were repositories of oral history, traditional knowledge, and cultural practices that had been passed down through generations. When entire communities died overnight, languages were lost, traditional songs were silenced forever, and ancestral knowledge about local plants, animals, and weather patterns died with the people who carried it. Anthropologists who studied the region later described it as a cultural catastrophe that went far beyond the immediate human tragedy. The economic impact on the region was also profound and long-lasting. The affected villages had been largely self-sufficient, with complex networks of trade and cooperation that had developed over centuries. The disaster didn't just kill people, it destroyed entire economic systems. Cattle herds that had been built up over generations were wiped out. Agricultural knowledge about local soil conditions and planting patterns was lost. Markets and trade relationships that had existed for decades simply ceased to exist overnight. The international scientific response to Lake Nyos revealed both the power and limitations of modern science when confronted with unprecedented natural phenomena. The first challenge was simply understanding what had happened. The initial theories ranged from poison gas attacks to supernatural causes because the pattern of death was so unlike anything in the scientific literature. It took weeks of investigation and analysis before researchers could definitively conclude that a limnic eruption had occurred. Dr. Michele Tuttle, an American geologist who was part of the initial investigation team, described the experience as like being a detective in a murder mystery, where the murder weapon was invisible and the crime scene provided almost no clues. The only evidence was the devastating result: over 1,700 people dead with no obvious cause. The investigation required innovative approaches, including analyzing gas samples from the lake, studying the position of bodies, and interviewing the few survivors to piece together what had happened. The technical challenges of investigating Lake Nyos were enormous. The lake was in a remote location with no infrastructure, making it difficult to transport scientific equipment. The lake itself was still potentially dangerous, with unknown concentrations of carbon dioxide that could kill researchers. The team had to work with primitive communication systems and limited supplies, all while racing against time to understand the disaster before the evidence disappeared or the lake erupted again. What made the investigation even more complex was the realization that this wasn't just a one-time freak accident. The geological conditions that created Lake Nyos existed in other locations, and the disaster had revealed a completely unknown category of natural hazard. The scientists weren't just investigating a single event, they were uncovering a new type of threat that could potentially affect millions of people around the world. The story of the degassing system installation reads like a thriller in itself. Engineers and scientists had to work on a lake that could potentially kill them at any moment, lowering equipment hundreds of feet into water that was supersaturated with deadly gas. The first attempts to install monitoring equipment were nerve-wracking affairs, with researchers wearing gas masks and keeping boats ready for immediate evacuation. Every measurement, every sample, every piece of equipment installation was potentially life-threatening. The degassing system itself is a marvel of engineering designed to address a threat that had never been encountered before. The principle is elegant in its simplicity. Use the pressure of the gas itself to create a fountain that brings deep water to the surface, allowing the carbon dioxide to escape gradually and safely. But the execution required solving problems that no engineer had ever faced before. How do you anchor a pipe system in the middle of a deep lake? How do you ensure that the system will continue to operate without maintenance for years? How do you prevent the system itself from triggering a catastrophic eruption? The installation process took months and required international cooperation between French, American, and Cameroonian engineers and scientists. The work was done in stages, with each phase carefully monitored to ensure that the lake remained stable. The team had to develop new techniques for deep water construction, create fail-safe systems to prevent accidental triggering of an eruption, and establish monitoring protocols to ensure the system's continued effectiveness. But here's where the story takes on even greater significance. The success of the Lake Nyos degassing system has become a model for addressing similar threats around the world. The techniques developed for this project have been adapted for use at other potentially dangerous lakes, and the monitoring systems have been refined and improved. The disaster that claimed over 1,700 lives has led to technologies that could potentially save millions of lives in the future. The ongoing monitoring of Lake Nyos reveals the long-term nature of the threat and the solution. The degassing system has been operating continuously for decades, slowly reducing the concentration of carbon dioxide in the lake's depths. But the process is gradual, and the lake will require monitoring and maintenance for generations to come. The volcanic activity beneath the lake continues to produce carbon dioxide, so the degassing system isn't a cure, it's a treatment that must be maintained indefinitely. The story of Lake Nyos also highlights the intersection of natural disasters and social justice. The communities affected by the disaster were among the poorest and most isolated in Cameroon, with little political power and limited access to resources. The international response, while significant, also revealed the challenges of providing aid to remote, marginalized communities. The survivors were relocated to other areas, often far from their traditional territories, and many struggled to adapt to their new circumstances. The compensation and rebuilding efforts following the disaster were complicated by the fact that many of the victims had no formal documentation of their property or possessions. Traditional land ownership systems weren't recognized by government bureaucracies, and many survivors found themselves unable to prove their losses. The disaster revealed how vulnerable marginalized communities are not just to natural hazards, but to the institutional failures that can compound the impact of disasters. The environmental recovery of the Lake Nyos region has been a slow and complex process. The massive release of carbon dioxide initially sterilized large areas of the ecosystem, creating a bizarre landscape where plant life continued to grow, but animal life was absent. The recovery of insect populations, bird life, and small mammals took months, and the ecosystem's return to normal functioning took years. Researchers studying the area have gained unique insights into how ecosystems respond to and recover from massive atmospheric disruptions. The agricultural recovery has been equally complex. The affected villages had developed sophisticated agricultural systems adapted to local conditions over centuries. The disaster didn't just kill farmers, it destroyed the accumulated knowledge about soil conditions, crop rotation, weather patterns, and pest management that had been passed down through generations. Efforts to re-establish agriculture in the region have had to start from scratch, often using imported knowledge and techniques that aren't necessarily well suited to local conditions. The story of Lake Nyos continues to evolve as climate change and human development create new challenges and opportunities. Rising global temperatures could potentially affect the stability of gas-saturated lakes, and increasing human population in previously uninhabited areas could put more people at risk from similar disasters. The lessons learned from Lake Nyos have become more relevant, not less, as our understanding of environmental risks continues to evolve. The disaster has also had implications for how we think about environmental monitoring and early warning systems. Traditional disaster preparedness focuses on events that provide some warning, but limnic eruptions represent a category of natural disaster that requires continuous scientific monitoring to prevent. The Lake Nyos experience has led to the development of new monitoring technologies and protocols that could be applied to other types of hidden environmental hazards. The international scientific collaboration that emerged from the Lake Nyos disaster has become a model for how the global scientific community can respond to unprecedented natural threats. The investigation required expertise from geology, chemistry, engineering, atmospheric science, and numerous other fields, and the solutions required cooperation between institutions and governments across multiple continents. The project demonstrated that some environmental threats are so complex and potentially devastating that they require international cooperation to address effectively. The story of Lake Nyos serves as a powerful reminder of the hidden complexities of our planet's natural systems. The disaster revealed that seemingly peaceful natural features can hide deadly threats, and that our understanding of environmental risks is still incomplete. The lake that had been a source of life and beauty for the surrounding communities for generations was revealed to be a weapon that had been loading itself for decades, waiting for the right trigger to unleash its deadly potential. The legacy of the Lake Nyos disaster extends far beyond the immediate tragedy. The event fundamentally changed how we understand the relationship between geology and atmospheric hazards, led to the development of new monitoring and prevention technologies, and revealed the vulnerability of isolated communities to unprecedented natural phenomena. The disaster serves as a case study in environmental science, disaster response, international cooperation, and the complex relationships between human communities and their natural environment. The survivors of Lake Nyos carry with them not just the memory of personal tragedy, but the weight of being witnesses to one of the most unique and devastating natural disasters in recorded history. Their stories remind us that our planet still holds the power to surprise us in the most deadly ways, and that the peaceful appearance of natural features can sometimes hide the most dangerous threats of all. The silence that fell over the valley that August night in 1986 was not just the absence of sound, but the absence of life itself, removed by an invisible force that had been building for decades beneath the surface of a beautiful lake. The Lake Nyos disaster stands as a stark reminder that we live on a planet that is still full of surprises, some of them deadly, and that the price of ignorance about natural hazards can be measured in human lives. The story continues to unfold as scientists work to understand and prevent similar disasters, but the fundamental lesson remains unchanged. Nature's power to surprise and destroy us is far greater than we often imagine, and it can strike from the most unexpected places in the most unexpected ways. The degassing fountains that now operate continuously in Lake Nyos serve as both a solution and a symbol, constant reminders of the hidden dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of our beautiful but unpredictable planet.